Revenge is a dish best served cold, and in the octagon, it comes to the plate with a side of very painful consequences. These are MMA's greatest revenge moments. Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Team McGregor. This first tale is one that shows us perfectly that every man has his breaking point, a line that, when crossed, can see even the calmest person in the room rain down with fiery consequences. And in UFC history, you could argue that no fighter has been pushed quite as far as Khabib Nurmagomedov was by Conor McGregor. We all know how things kicked off. The public humiliation of Conor's teammate Artem Lobov, the attack on the bus that followed. But for our money, the real verbal assault began when the pair faced off for their first shared press conference. McGregor made the point of doing everything in his power to try and rattle Nurmagomedov's cage, taking aim at his religion, his culture, his team, his homeland, and his fighting style. He showed up to the press conferences late, drinking his proper 12 whiskey, while ridiculing the devout Muslim across from him as he refused to partake. But even though Khabib appeared stoic and level-headed, inside there was a fury brewing that would not show itself until fight night. And boy, did this Dagestan destroyer turn up in a big way at UFC 229. It was a truly dominant effort from Nurmagomedov over the 4 rounds the fight lasted, as he broke down the Irishman's will before submitting him with a neck crank for the finish. However, that wasn't enough for the Eagle, and after noticing that Conor's teammate Dylan Dennis was still hurling insults at him cage side, Khabib decided enough was enough and vaulted over the side of the cage, diving headfirst into McGregor's corner and sparking a brawl that spilled into the crowd and back into the octagon. Conor then came under attack from Team Khabib's Zubaira Tukhugov, getting punched from behind before security could get a hold of the situation. It was a night of great revenge for Khabib, both inside the cage and out of it, in front of the biggest audience the UFC had ever known. TJ Dillashaw versus Cody Garbrandt. He might be a snake in the grass, but it was hard to escape the feeling that Team Alpha Male were making an almighty fuss over a pretty straightforward situation. It was easy to hate on TJ Dillashaw when Conor McGregor accused him of selling out his teammates in order to follow his striking coach Dwayne Ludwig away from Uriah Faber's gym, but in hindsight, these things happen all the time. And considering how things eventually played out, it was easy to get the sense that Faber, Cody Garbrandt, and their team were playing it up for the cameras. Dillashaw's old gym mate used every opportunity to attack TJ's character after he left their gym as a UFC champion in order to make what he saw as a positive move for his career. But the bonds they had shared over the years quickly turned into some real venom during the build-up to the UFC 217 clash between the champ Garbrandt and the challenger that had once called him a friend. Looking back on it now, it's easy to be a bit more sympathetic to Dillashaw's cause. But when fight night came around, you could see just how much damage had been done. So when TJ managed to drop and finish Cody in round 2, his immediate reaction was one of pure, raw emotion. Roaring in the face of no love was his own way of telling him just how he felt about being demonized like that. A fitting revenge for a fighter who had his character assassinated for over 2 years up until that point. Georges St. Pierre versus Matt Serra 2. It was an upset of truly monstrous proportions, the type of moment that made every MMA fan in the world sit back and pinch themselves just to make sure it was real. The year was 2007, and the long-serving 170-pound king Matt Hughes had just been defeated by the most exciting prospect in the sport's history, the supremely athletic, naturally gifted talent that was Georges St. Pierre. There was this sense that the UFC had unearthed a generational superstar in the making, the type of presence that could well help Dana White and his team as they pushed for mainstream acceptance. Of course, St. Pierre would eventually go on to do just that, but in his first title defense, the promotion made an odd decision that would forever leave its mark on MMA history. Instead of setting GSP up against a top contender within the roster's existing ranks, they instead opted to put together an entire season of The Ultimate Fighter, designed to give a selection of veterans the opportunity to compete for a guaranteed shot at the 170-pound title. The BJJ fighter Matt Serra was the one to emerge from the pack, setting him up as an unlikely contender to St. Pierre's throne, a fight that most agreed he had no chance of winning. And it made what happened on Fight Night one of the most incredible moments the sport had ever known. Serra caught and stunned GSP early, following him to the floor as he flailed all over the octagon. The fans, the commentators, none of them could believe what they were watching. And sure enough, eventually the referee had seen enough, declaring Matt Serra as the welterweight champion of the world. But his reign would be short-lived, and as soon as St. Pierre left the arena that night, he went to work on plotting his revenge. And when the rematch came, man, Serra was little more than a punching bag for the fired-up former champion. To say that GSP destroyed Matt Serra on that night would be putting it lightly. He dished out a constant stream of punishment, eventually forcing the stoppage with some truly ugly-looking knees to the body. Order was restored at 170 pounds, and the greatest fighter the division has ever known had found his way back to his rightful position at the top. Dustin Poirier versus Conor McGregor 2. There was no immediate rematch for Dustin Poirier after his first-round KO loss to Conor McGregor at 145 pounds, leaving the Diamond to marinate in his lowest moment for 7 long years. Conor's mental warfare was at an all-time peak as he ridiculed the Lafayette, Louisiana native, calling him a hillbilly peahead, another fighter who was destined to fall at his hands like all before him. And when fight night came around, McGregor's call for an early finish came to pass as he clattered Dustin's head off the canvas. Yet another eerily accurate prediction. And so the victorious fighter progressed upwards, leaving Poirier to reinvent himself as a lightweight. During the next 7 years, Dustin watched from the sidelines as the man who thoroughly embarrassed him grew into the global sensation he is today, knowing full well that most people knew the name Dustin Poirier as little more than a footnote on the rise of the sport's biggest superstar. And in 2021, when their rematch finally came, though the general relationship between both men was pretty polite and cordial at first, you could just tell that Dustin was hungry, that he was determined to right the wrong that had followed him for years. And this time, he came in with a cool head and the perfect game plan to disrupt Conor's heavy boxing stance. Once the fight began, the pace was electric. Both men landed, but neither found the early finish. In fact, it was Conor who actually seemed to come away with the edge in the first round. But Poirier had an ace up his sleeve this time around, a constant stream of accurate calf kicks that eventually left McGregor compromised. When DP smelled blood at the end of round 2, he pounced, landing hard shots to secure a huge TKO finish. The third fight between the two was, of course, marred by that horrific injury to McGregor's leg. But you could just tell that Poirier was savoring the moment as he stood over the furious, defeated Irishman, taking Conor's threats on the chin while mocking his famed Billy Strut, confident that he had done enough to prove himself to be the superior fighter. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen 2. The undefeated, undisputed Chael Sonnen once famously laughed at the idea that you can hit a man 300 times. He wraps his legs around your head for 8 seconds and they call him the winner. And as it turns out, he may have had a point. Or at least it was easy to see how Sonnen came away from UFC 117 with a massive moral victory in his back pocket. During the build-up to that fight, he talked and talked and talked. And just when it appeared as though he had talked enough, he talked some more. And by the time fight night came around, Silva really did appear to have been affected. Sonnen's takedowns were the story of that fight, and the constant threat of the double leg opened up some shocking striking opportunities on the feet, with Chael even knocking the Spider down early on. And for 4.5 rounds, the American gangster put it on the middleweight champ, proving that his relentless trash talk was not without its substance. But in the dying embers of round 5, just as it seemed as though Sonnen was about to pull off an upset for the ages, he made one fatal error, leaving himself exposed enough for Silva to latch onto a triangle choke, forcing the tap and killing Chael's title dream there and then. However, Anderson's stock coming out of that fight was not in a good place, and Sonnen, as you would expect, used every opportunity to proclaim that he was the rightful middleweight king, the uncrowned champion. Jump forward 2 years, finally the rematch was booked. And though it was Silva who came away with the win at UFC 117, you'd best believe that he was the one who had the biggest point to prove. And after a first round that saw Chael once again use his wrestling to good effect, history repeated itself in the second, where one fatal error cost the challenger dearly. For some strange reason, Sonnen decided to attempt to attack the greatest striker in the sport with a terribly timed spinning back fist. In doing so, he tripped, while Silva easily ducked out of the way, moving in to finish his grounded opponent there and then, finally silencing his doubters with a comprehensive victory, the perfect revenge. Brock Lesnar versus Frank Mir 2. Behemoth, force of nature, terror personified. Just some of the ways that Brock Lesnar has been described over the years. And after handing him his first loss as an MMA fighter, Frank Mir was forced to accept that just one shared appearance with this 300-pound monster was not going to be enough. When the longtime WWE superstar Lesnar revealed that he was going to bring his collegiate wrestling credentials and immense physicality to the world of the UFC, fans were split down the middle on how to react. Some thought that he would have no chance of catching up with a group of athletes who had spent years upon years refining and rounding out their skill sets. Others believed that his unique physical gifts would be enough to make up some of the difference. The true answer, surprisingly enough, was somewhere in the middle. In an attempt to fast-track him to the title, the UFC opted to set him up for a debut matchup against the veteran former champion Frank Mir. And for a while, it looked like Brock was about to do the unthinkable. An early onslaught of ground and pound saw Lesnar come within touching distance of a finish, but in the end, Mir's high-level Brazilian jiu-jitsu skills saw him latch on to one of Brock's massive legs, syncing up a fight-ending knee bar. Jump forward a year, and against all odds, Brock Lesnar had found his footing in the sport, beating Heath Herring and Randy Couture to become the heavyweight champion of the world. And this time, he was ready to silence all those who claimed that a competent BJJ specialist like Frank Mir would once again prove to be his undoing. This time, he came in calmer, more composed, and when he did finally find his opening, he hammered down on the veteran to secure a TKO victory, defending his crown and earning a slice of sweet, sweet revenge to go with. Stipe Miocic versus Francis Ngannou 2. Sometimes in life, an opportunity comes around that you're not ready for, but to meet failure, rise up and eventually conquer it, that is truly what being a champion is all about. In recent years, few fighters have gotten the level of promotional push that the hulking heavyweight Francis Ngannou got when he blasted his way straight into a title shot after nearly decapitating the legendary Alistair Overeem at UFC 218. Looking to cash in, the UFC decided to throw him into a 5-round championship matchup against the consensus greatest heavyweight the promotion has ever seen in Stipe Miocic. Once Stipe got a hold of the inexperienced Ngannou, however, the levels that exist within this game were made very, very clear. After escaping round 1 with his chin intact, Miocic put on a wrestling clinic, thoroughly dominating Francis for the next 4 rounds, embarrassing him on his way to yet another title defense. Ngannou then lowered his stock even further with one of the worst fights in UFC history against Derrick Lewis. But then, the unexpected happened. A 4-fight streak of knockout wins saw the Predator recapture the public's respect, and by the time the rematch with Miocic was set up, we all knew there was a good chance that this would be a very different fight. And from the opening bell, it was clear that this was a new version of Francis Ngannou. He even managed to take the seasoned veteran down before pummeling him with some brutal shots from the back for good measure. In round 2, Stipe looked like a beaten man, and when Francis had the opportunity to shut him down, a swift counter ended his reign right there and then, leaving Ngannou as the heavyweight king and the owner of a revenge story for the ages.